From November 1982 to May 1984, Robert Smith of The Cure was a member of Siouxsie and the Banshees. The band produced some incredible work during that period. Banshee's bassist Steve Severin also had a close friendship with Robert, which yielded a great one-off band project called The Glove. Robert Smith took hair, makeup, and fashion tips from Siouxsie Sioux, and some musical ones as well. In some ways, he seemed happier with the Banshees than he was when he was playing with The Cure. Siouxsie and Robert had a fruitful musical relationship, but it couldn't last forever. In this video, we'll tell you the story of Robert Smith's time with the Banshees, the antics of some of the players, and how this unique musical moment energized and revitalized both bands and the artists involved. Siouxsie and the Banshees had formed in 1976. Vocalist Siouxsie Sioux co-founded the band with Steven Severin on bass. Severin's last name was taken from the character in the Velvet Underground song Venus in Furs. Sid Vicious played drums for the Banshees only once at their first show. Guitarist John McKay and drummer Kenny Morris eventually rounded out the group with a bit of performance art sensibility. Their 1978 debut album The Scream placed Siouxsie and her band at the forefront of a new post-punk musical and street fashion movement. The Scream was an influential record for a lot of musicians, and it had a big impact on Robert Smith as The Cure was forming in 1978. The Banshees, growing in popularity, followed up with a sophomore album, the stark goth war memorial classic Join Hands. But the Banshees were about to hit a rough spot. Bassist Severin and Siouxsie were often at odds with guitarist McKay and drummer Kenny Morris. A warm-up show in Ireland was disastrous for John McKay, as none of his gear arrived at the venue. This forced the guitarist to play without his essential effects pedals, and any guitarist knows that can be a major problem. McKay used a lot of effects. The day the Join Hands album tour was to begin, band tensions peaked at a record signing event. They were at the Other Record Shop on Union Street in Aberdeen. For one thing, the shop had ordered 200 records, and Polydor had only delivered 50, which sold immediately. Banshee's manager, Neil Stevenson, sold the shop his own personal stash of records to cover the demand. And meanwhile, John McKay and Kenny Morris started handing out copies of the album for free. When the store manager objected, the pair refused to sign any more autographs. Kenny and John walked out on the record store event. Kenny and John skipped the sound check for the show as well, and that night, while The Cure played their opening set, Siouxsie and bassist Steve Severin slowly realized their drummer and guitarist were really not returning for the first gig of the tour. They were down 2 Banshees. By some accounts, Severin actually blocked The Cure from leaving the stage and yelled at them to keep playing. While Siouxsie and Severin fruitlessly searched for the missing bandmates, The Cure played a longer set than usual, followed by Robert joining Siouxsie and Severin in an extended take on the Lord's Prayer, a Velvet Underground-esque noise rock poetry jam which was on Join Hands and had become a regular feature of their shows. In short, Robert Smith saved the Banshees' skins that night. Of the departed John McKay and Kenny Morris, Siouxsie said, "If you have 1 ounce of hatred like we had for those 2 arty ones, you can kill them in my name." Siouxsie's curse was powerful. When they left the Banshees, John and Kenny lost their record contract with Polydor. They also had no management. John McKay's guitar was given away to a fan by the Banshees after the Aberdeen gig. I'd love to know where that guitar ended up. If you have any idea, please comment below. Kenny's drum kit was simply kept by the Banshees and used by their new drummer. The kit was later given to Titch from Altered Images. The Banshees claimed Kenny Morris and John McKay's publishing income in lieu of damages from the cancellation of several gigs. Kenny Morris eventually decided not to continue in music and returned to university to study art. John McKay formed Zor Gabor a few years later with his girlfriend Linda Clark. They released one 3-song 12-inch, which is pretty cool and got good press, but barely made a ripple before the In-Tape record label folded. John and Linda kept playing live shows until the late 80s. By 1991, John McKay and his girlfriend Linda were selling homemade jewelry from a stall on Camden Market in London, and reportedly, John McKay continued to deny repeated requests from fans and other stall holders who asked him to autograph Banshees records. Following the Aberdeen fiasco, Siouxsie and Severin had to quickly find a drummer and guitarist. Luckily, they recruited Budgie, the drummer from the Slits. He would prove to be an excellent fit with the band and would be made permanent drummer at the conclusion of the tour. He also got Kenny Morris's drum kit, so that was a bonus. They were still having trouble finding the guitarist, auditioning various hopeful players. Robert Smith eventually offered to fill in on guitar temporarily while they finished the tour. The Cure were already supporting Susie, why not? Both bands had a vested interest in keeping the tour going. All this time spent playing with the Banshees had a musical impact on Robert. After the 1979 Join Hands tour, when asked how playing with the Banshees impacted him, Smith said, "It allowed me to experiment. I inherited an approach from John Mackay, which was just to have everything full up, using phased, flanged distortion. The great thing about the Banshees was that they had this great wall of noise, which I'd never heard before. Over this period, naturally Susie and Robert Smith became closer friends, bonding over their shared love of music and their outsider status in the music industry. Smith was a huge fan of Susie's distinctive voice and her charismatic stage presence. He was inspired by her innovative and experimental approach to music. When the Join Hands tour ended, Robert Smith returned to The Cure. They were preparing to release their second album, 17 Seconds. And so Budgie became their permanent drummer, and the band entered the studio to record the single Happy House with guitarist John McGeoch. McGeoch was then still guitarist for the band magazine. Happy House was the first song to feature his guitar work with the Banshees, along with the contributions of the new drummer Budgie. The result was stunning, a new, more melodic, ethereal, and groovy sound. Susie called it Banshees Phase 2. Between 1980 and 1982, John McGeoch and Banshees Phase 2 yielded 3 phenomenal records: Kaleidoscope, Juju, and A Kiss in the Dream House. John's guitar work on the song Spellbound continues to be praised by guitarists and fans as innovative and influential. In 1996, Mojo listed him in their 100 Greatest Guitarists of All Time. Susie Sue agreed, saying, "John McGeoch was my favorite guitarist of all time. He was into sound in an almost abstract way. I love the way that I could say, I want this to sound like a horse falling off a cliff, and he would know exactly what I meant. He was easily, without the shadow of a doubt, the most creative guitarist the Banshees ever had." McGeoch's mental health suffered on the road, though, and his heavy drinking didn't help matters. An error-filled gig in Madrid revealed some issues needed to be addressed. In October of 1982, John McGeoch was asked to leave the band to recover. He never rejoined the Banshees, though his period with them yielded some incredible music. McGeoch went on to play guitar on the best albums by John Lydon's band Pill, and played with Peter Murphy on his solo album. And so the Banshees needed a guitarist, again. Robert Smith, for his part, was exhausted from recording and then touring for the Cure album Pornography. Severin didn't help. If he wasn't lurking at the Let's Go to Bed recording sessions, pestering Robert to break up the Cure and join the Banshees, he was hanging out backstage at Cure shows, mischievously hiding Cure drummer Lowell Tolhurst's drinks, or spiking them with LSD. Wouldn't Robert rather be in a serious group with serious musicians rather than this accidental pop band? I was always asking Robert to disband the Cure and join the Banshees. I was definitely sowing the seeds of discontent. Finally, Robert Smith agreed to join the Banshees. When he was asked if he was rejoining the Cure later, Smith asked the interviewer, "Do the Cure really exist anymore? I've been pondering that question myself." And when asked about his future with the Banshees, Robert was equally cagey. "As far as I'm concerned, I'm just doing this tour. Never believe rumors." Lawrence Tolhurst, drummer for The Cure, says at the time he viewed it as a musical vacation for Smith, and always knew Robert would return to The Cure. Meanwhile, The Cure's record label, Fiction, was freaking out. Their cash cow Cure frontman was wandering off with a bunch of Banshees. The label reps would hang out at Banshee shows to stalk Robert. The Banshees did everything they could to keep Smith busy and away from Fiction Records head Chris Parry. Photo shoots, festival gigs, rehearsals, videos, whatever. Robert enjoyed Banshee life. He could hang out with Severin and play music each night without being expected to write new material, make music videos, and make financial decisions about the Cure. Robert also got along well with Susie Sue, someone people often considered prickly and intimidating. He said, "I think it's because I don't take her too seriously. It's novel for her to have someone tell her to shut up because most people are too scared." Susie and the Banshees Phase 3 with Robert Smith was a hard-working band. They toured the UK until the end of 1982, and in January and February of 1983 they did shows in Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Chris Perry from Fiction was outraged that Smith was off touring with Susie, and he sued Robert Smith to try and make him return to The Cure. Reportedly, Robert Smith called and said he would break Perry's legs. Perry backed off, apologizing, trying to salvage the partnership, while Robert Smith tried to figure out his next move. Yes, the time had come for Robert Smith to make a decision. Would he be a Banshee for good, disappearing into the night and dissolving the pop band that was such a headache? Or would he return to his own creative castle where he was king, The Cure? He decided eventually to do both. He'd hang out with the Banshees when The Cure and Fiction records got annoying, and when Susie got on his nerves, he'd return to The Cure. During that era, Smith and Severin did a bit of extracurricular collaborating. Severin's first studio recording with Smith was to record an early version of The Cure song Lament for Flexipop magazine. Severin then played bass again with The Cure for a one-off live appearance on BBC's Riverside in January of 1983 for a rendition of the song Siamese Twins that the Royal Ballet danced to. There were goth ballet dancers and everything. It really was a special time. Truth be told, Robert was thrilled to step away from his band. Substance abuse and band tensions were taking their toll on The Cure. Fiction Records was looking at him as little more than a revenue generator. Hanging out with the Banshees was a lot more fun. When Robert rejoined the Banshees as their official lead guitarist in November of 1982, the Banshees celebrated this reunion in a strange way. They amiably fractured into two friendly, separate bands to work on new passion projects and energize themselves creatively. Susie and drummer Budgie had formed their percussion and voice-centered duo The Creatures while recording Juju in 1981. As 82 ended and 1983 began, they dug into Feast, their first full-length album as The Creatures. Budgie and Susie chose a recording location by sticking a pin in a map, traveling to tropical Hawaii for exotica inspiration, found sounds, and hula chant vocals. The lush Feast reached number 17 on the UK album chart, and the single Miss the Girl peaked at number 21. It was an auspicious start to what would become a decades-long project. At the same time, Robert and Severin were working together on another spin-off group. They both had started to compose material for an album in 1982. They hung out a lot at that time. Robert Smith often slept on the floor of Severin's London flat, wrapped in heaps of coats. Soon they were ready and migrated to London's Britannia Row Studios, which is owned by Pink Floyd. They were ready to record their psychedelic-fueled passion project. The Glove was the name of the band, named for the evil flying blue glove in Yellow Submarine. Severin came up with the band name and the blue and yellow sleeve concept for the album. Severin also named the record Blue Sunshine after the psychedelic zombie video Nasty. Smith was unable to sing much on this record due to contractual obligations, so the two decided they needed another vocalist. Budgie's ex-girlfriend, artist and choreographer Jeanette Landry, was a friend of both Robert and Steven. She said, "I was a good friend of Steven's and I asked him if I could sing for the record. He said, 'You can't sing.' I replied, 'So?' Robert and Severin dug working together and they really enjoyed themselves while doing it. It was a space of pure creativity and a good deal of psychedelics and other substances were involved. In late 1982 was when they began recording the first song, Punish Me With Kisses. They hung out, partied, and watched video nasties as they worked. Jeanette Landry recalls that they watched Barbarella, for example. It's safe to guess that they also watched the film Blue Sunshine. They left to tour with Susie and the Banshees, continuing working on the Glove album when the Banshees returned to London. Robert and Steven never suffocated me, they let me experiment. There was a time when my singing of Like an Animal was not getting crazy enough, and all of a sudden I hear this soft voice singing from behind a couch. I walk over towards the voice and it's Robert on all fours, singing Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. Let's just say Robert and Steven were easy to work with. Susie and Budgie would often look in on the sessions, and they had the sensibilities to know what we were doing was something fantastic, something magical. The album reached number 35 in the UK in 1983, and the single Like an Animal peaked just outside the UK top 50. The next single from the album, Punish Me With Kisses, only made it into the top 100. Robert Smith did sing on a few tracks, the really great tunes Mr. Alphabet Says and Perfect Murder, but truly, the featured vocalist here is the sublime Jeanette Landry. She may have been a hired voice, but she really brought something special to the project. The album is a unique piece of work from a really special moment in time, and we highly recommend it for fans of The Cure or Susie. The Banshees recorded 2 shows at Royal Albert Hall in London on September 30th and 1st of October 1983. They'd used both performances to create the live concert video and album Nocturne. Most of the songs are from A Kiss in the Dream House and Juju, with some B-sides included. They also did 2 covers of Beatles songs, Helter Skelter and Dear Prudence, both from the Beatles' White Album. This is an exceptional concert video. I had the VHS tape as a teenager, and I played it over and over again. Pulled to Bits is a top moment for me, with Robert's open acoustic strumming. Hyena was a long burn of an album, taking almost a year for the Banshees to complete the recordings at Eel Pie Studios. They recorded that cover of Beatles' Dear Prudence, and it had become one of the Susie and the Banshees' most popular singles. It was such a hit in the UK that the Banshees eventually integrated it into the US album release of Hyena. The record would be their most sophisticated to date, with the London Symphonic Orchestra scoring a lush piece Susie wrote for the part of the opening track Dazzle. Robert Smith contributed his distinctive guitar sound and playing style to multi-layered songs like Take Me Back and Belladonna. Robert takes on duties as a pianist in addition to guitar. Viewer, listen to the Susie and the Banshees song Swimming Horses from Hyena, and then listen to the similar catchy piano part which would appear in the Cure song 6 Different Ways from the Head on the Door album the following year. There's some similarities there. While the Banshees were recording Hyena, Robert also worked with the Cure on a string of hit singles and charming music videos. Let's Go to Bed, The Walk, Love Cats, and The Caterpillar. These were packaged with B-sides as the EP Japanese Whispers. The Cure then dove into their next album. The Cure's album The Top dropped in May 1984, a month before the June 1984 release of Susie and the Banshees' Hyena album. This was an extremely prolific period for Robert Smith, but he was bouncing back and forth from one band to the other. There were periods where he was recording with the Banshees during the day, leaving in the evening to join the Cure for an all-night recording session. It was a non-stop, sleepless party and relentless creative push, powered by tea made from magic mushrooms. It just wasn't sustainable. Robert quit the Banshees when Hyena dropped, giving his 2-week notice before the band toured in support of the record. Robert felt he was being fair, saying in his book 10 Imaginary Years, "I think Severin understood, and by then my mind was made up. After all, I'd given them 2 weeks' notice, which was longer than any guitarist had ever given them before." Robert and Severin did remain friends over the years. Susie Sue, however, didn't seem to take his betrayal quite so well. In a 2000 interview for Uncut, after referring to Robert Smith as a fat fool, Sue said, "It wasn't like he was ill. He was one of those people who just didn't say no to anything. So when it's self-induced, it's hard to have sympathy. To actually say 2 days before a tour that's been planned in advance that you can't do it? F*** off. What a lightweight." Hey, if you dug this video, please click like and subscribe. It's a huge help. And then check out this video with David J. from Bauhaus and Love and Rockets. He talks about writing Bela Lugosi's Dead. It's a freaking phenomenal interview, if I do say so myself. Check it out.